All right, hello APUSH students. This is Mr. Southall. This is for Tuesday's notes of September 28th, 2021. We're finishing up Unit 3 on the Era of Good Feelings, James Monroe's presidency, and a few other tidbits going into the 1820s. Remember, the test is going to still be tomorrow on Wednesday, the 29th. It's going to be multiple choice questions from chapters 9 through 12. You're also going to see some old questions from Unit 1 and 2, and I'll make sure those get posted as well. So yesterday we left off with changes in Democratic-Republican Party. Remember we said that after the Hartford Convention and the Federalist Party kind of falling apart because they looked unpatriotic and wanted to secede, you get one national party that dominates the 8 years of James Monroe, which is one of the reasons why it's regarded as the Era of Good Feelings. So we finished there yesterday. We're going to pick up with landmark court cases. So we talked, and I know some of y'all talked about these back with government or civics a few years ago, but there are some more John Marshall court cases. Obviously, if he's the Chief Justice for 34 years, he's going to have some big ones. You can see a picture of him right there with his hand on the book, right next to all the court cases at the bottom of the screen. John Marshall had Marbury v. Madison, of course, asserted the court's authority for the principle of judicial review. We talked about that a few days ago. We're going to go over these other court cases. Now, these court cases you see below, you don't have to know these by heart. The way you would probably see it on a test on the AP exam would be quotations from the court cases or the opinions or some kind of reference to the court cases. All you really kind of need to know in general for my test and for the AP test overall is that any Marshall case, any court case from like 1800 till about 1834, which is Marshall, needs to be considered to be pro-federalist or pro-national government, making the national government stronger, making the states not as strong in general. So we're going to go through them real quick, kind of give a brief synopsis of all these. When I get back, I'm going to give you a little cheat sheet for the Supreme Court cases for the rest of the year that has some of these on there. But again, you don't have to memorize these for the test tomorrow or for the AP test in general. It's just good to know in general some of his major cases and how they all asserted the authority of the national government over the rest. So anyway, so Marshall was still a Federalist, even though his party fell apart while he was still the Chief Justice in the 18 teens and 20s and into the 30s as well too. He always favored strong central government and the rights of property against the advocates of states' rights. So the first court case is Fletcher v. Peck, 1810. Fletcher v. Peck, 1810. This is the first time the Supreme Court declared a state law unconstitutional. So it's the first time that the Supreme Court took up a state ruling or state law and declared it unconstitutional, again asserting the authority of the federal government or the national government over the state's government. You don't have to even know what the court case was about directly. You just need to be aware that's the first time that the national government asserts its authority over the states by saying a state law was unconstitutional. The next one, Martin v. Hunter's lease in 1816, established the principle of jurisdiction over state courts. This establishes the principle of jurisdiction over state courts. So in Martin versus Hunter's lease, 1816, this establishes the principle of jurisdiction over states courts, meaning that basically federal courts have jurisdiction or oversight over states courts. That still applies today. There's a lot more details behind that, but it asserts that authority that federal courts, district courts, federal district courts, and appeals courts and Supreme Court, all of those have authority over any kind of state case and state laws. Now, the one big one that comes under Marshall in this time period that's kind of out there at Marshall with Marbury versus Madison is McCulloch versus Maryland. Some of y'all thought about this or remember this from the other day. This was the one about the bank that y'all talked about in class. McCulloch versus Maryland is a big court case because it says the federal government does have the implied power to create a national bank. What happens here in the late 18 teens, the second national bank had developed and, as we said, became unpopular. Because it was located in Maryland, Maryland actually tried to collect taxes from it since it was placed in Maryland, not in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else, and the court ruled against it. So basically, in this court case in McCulloch versus Maryland, it does two things. A, it established that the bank could be developed because it was implied in the Constitution that, you know, in the necessary and proper clause that things like this, like a bank may be developed, or later the IRS or whatever the case is, that not every single thing has to be listed in the Constitution. So it does give verification that the bank should exist. The other thing it does is it also says that basically states can't tax federal entities, can't tax federal properties or federal buildings. In this case, it's the bank. Can't tax the bank because it's federal property. So that's the two things it does, and that's an important establishment of an idea there. Next is Dartmouth College versus Woodward in 1819, and you also kind of combine Gibbons versus Ogden with these together. So Dartmouth College versus Woodward and Gibbons versus Ogden. In both of these cases, the federal government rules that it has control over interstate commerce. Both dealt with interstate commerce. The Dartmouth College versus Woodward dealt with some land disputes going back to like the colonial era, and the Gibbons versus Ogden dealt with riverboat. I think I'll talk about this in the government too. This deals with like laws being passed in different states to regulate riverboat commerce, but because it goes across different states, it violates the Constitution, because only the national government can regulate interstate commerce. Interstate meaning that it goes between states. So like Louisiana can regulate its own commerce as long as the vehicles like trains or cars or 18-wheelers or whatever stay in Louisiana. But as soon as it crosses state lines, it becomes a federal issue, and that's what they're asserting here, that you can't have laws going across rivers and stuff, different state lines from states. It has to be only federal government regulating commerce. The last one is Johnson v. McIntosh. I already have my notes down for that one, so don't even worry about that one. All these court cases, just be aware that, again, federal authority or national government asserts itself over state government. All right, the last little blurb here on this slide is westward settlement. 10 years after the War, 1812, the population west of the Appalachian Mountains doubled. So now we're looking in West Appalachians. No more limitations. A lot of Native Americans have been defeated out there. We've now expanded with Louisiana Purchase. So after the War 1812 dies down and all those concerns go away, a lot of Americans begin to migrate westward in general. They're going to head out west to west of the Appalachians. Not really far past the Mississippi at this point, but you do see more people populating like Tennessee, Kentucky, parts of Mississippi, parts of Alabama, parts of Arkansas and Missouri, those areas, Great Lakes areas, but not too far beyond those areas in general. Numerous factors led to the growth under Madison and Monroe while there's Western expansion. One, large tracts of lands opened up because of the War 1812, mostly thanks up north to William Henry Harrison, who won the Battle of Tippecanoe. He opened up a bunch of Indian territory when he fought against Tecumseh and during the War of 1812. So William Henry Harrison opened up land out west in the Northwest Territory, the Great Lakes area, and then Andrew Jackson, of course, fighting the Native Americans during the War of 1812 and after. Jackson continues his assaults against Native American tribes in Florida Territory, as well as like Alabama Territory, Georgia Territory, and Mississippi Territory. In fact, he's involved in what's called the First Seminole War. Seminole Wars, or Seminoles, spelled S-E-M-I-N-O-L-E. The Seminole War lasted from 1816 to 1819. Unofficial war where Jackson's leading the army against these various Native American settlers. He was even attacking them in Florida, which was controversial because Florida at this point is still owned by Spain. So he's actually crossing Florida territory and attacking Native American tribes there before we actually owned the territory. This kind of gets the Spanish nervous and kind of angry because they're worried that we might try to seize it by force, meaning Florida, and that was a big issue. Whites living in the frontier tended to champion expansion efforts. So whites living in the frontier areas, and when we say frontier at this point, we mean like Appalachian areas, like I said, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio area, Mississippi, Alabama areas. So whites living in the frontier tended to champion expansion efforts, but Native American resistance led to wars and federal efforts to control their resistance. So Native American resistance did lead to wars and federal efforts of control. Economically, some left New England during this time period due to the embargo. Because of the embargo during the Embargo Act of the 1807-1809 period, and because of the blockade by the British ships during the War 1812, from about 1812 to 1815, a lot of New Englanders left to go west because they couldn't make money. Basically, they were, because all their livelihood depended on trade or, shipping. A lot of folks in that time period started heading west to find land or some kind of new venture heading out west. Southerners began to head west too in this time period because there's new, better soil out there. With Native Americans clearing off that southern land, more farmers began to head to like Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee areas, Arkansas areas, Louisiana areas, because that's a lot of good land for farming. Same conditions, same climates. Remember, they did a lot of soil butchery in the South since the colonial period, so it's a lot of open land and available land they could get their hands on. So a lot of Southerners head west for new, better lands and better soil because of decades and really centuries of poor farming methods on the East Coast. Roads, canals, steamboats, and railways also assisted their travel. Now, don't get too crazy with railroads yet. Railroads don't really develop until the 1830s, but you do see people begin to develop roads and canals heading out west in the 18 teens and 20s. Again, roads being also referred to as turnpikes. So canals, roads, steamboats. Steamboats, again, don't really develop until 1830s or so, 1820s maybe. But most folks are still using wagon and horses to get out west. If you can take a boat, it'd be better because it's easier and cleaner. Immigrants were also attracted by land out west in the Great Lakes areas, Ohio areas, Cumberland areas. So their immigrants are also attracted to areas in the Great Lakes, Ohio, Cumberland areas. Westerners could also not agree on whether or not to permit slavery. So that's going to become a rising issue. The more we spread out west, the more people are going to have an issue about slavery spreading out west with people. So that's going to be a growing tension point for Americans, is that as Southerners go out west, of course, they want slavery. But as a lot of Northerners move out west, they're going to not want slavery, and that's going to become a problem as we add more territories and add more states. We might see an issue come up down the road where there's this tension boils over with slavery. We don't know. We'll see. Okay, one more thing real quick. We're going to look at the electoral college map. You see on the left side, you see Monroe wins pretty handily. There was a Federalist who ran that year, but their party was falling apart, and Monroe wins 84% of the vote. And like we said, he was so popular during the era of good feelings that he almost won unanimously, like George Washington in 1820. And somebody just nominated somebody randomly to not allow Monroe to have unanimous votes like Washington. So he could have been unanimous. Everybody liked him, but somebody thought it was improper to have anybody other than George Washington have a unanimous electoral college vote. So one person randomly voted for John Quincy Adams, even though John Quincy Adams was Secretary of State under James Monroe. So it was kind of a false election because there's only one party in that election as well in 1820. But Monroe was, you can see there, very, very popular. You can also see all the states have been developed. And look, old Louisiana's around now. 1816, 1820, old Louisiana's there as a brand new state. We formed in 1812. Okay. We're going to stop the first video there so I can go to my notes for the next page.